Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the Education in Crisis, Rethinking Education in Post-Pandemic South Asia Conference 2021. I am Mohini Gupta, one of the co-conveners of this conference, along with Dr. Uma Pradhan and Professor Karen Valentine. As a DPhil student at the University of Oxford, it is my honor to have the opportunity to share the stage with them. This conference has been organized by the Education South Asia Initiative based at the Contemporary South Asian Studies program at the Oxford School of Global and Area Studies, University of Oxford. We've been supported by Wolfson College and the University of Oxford's ESRC Impact Acceleration Account. The objective of this conference is to take the post-pandemic context of South Asia, both as a lens to understand the crisis, as well as a site to understand the existing challenges in education. As South Asia faces a devastating second wave of the pandemic and now stands at the brink of a third, we seek to explore a simple but crucial question. In what ways do we need to rethink education in South Asia? This idea was born out of a motivation to bring together academics and practitioners and policymakers from the field of education across South Asia and start a crucial dialogue between these stakeholders. We also realize that in the middle of a global crisis like this one, South Asian nations face issues that are different from other countries and can share these challenges and solutions with each other. We were keen to create a platform that would make these conversations possible. The incredible response to this conference, 840 registered participants, almost 300 abstract submissions, and over 100 speakers over these 2 days is a testimony to the need for a platform like this to exist today. On day 1 of the conference yesterday, we saw academics from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka come together to discuss similarities between the issues faced in the academic discipline of education, particularly in the study of South Asia. The Policy Roundtable in the afternoon brought together influential policymakers from India, Pakistan, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, where they discussed the ways in which they have been dealing with the pandemic in their respective countries and realized that the issues were actually much more similar than they had imagined. It was precisely this conversation that we were hoping to give rise to as a part of this conference. We also heard some brilliant research presentations on themes of space, teaching and learning, inequalities, and the state, from students and practitioners around the world. We now look forward to the conversations that will come out of today's program. At this morning's roundtable, which we will just begin in a few minutes, we will hear from education practitioners from India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Bhutan. This afternoon, we'll move on to issues of gender in education after the pandemic in conversation with academics and activists from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and Nepal. We also have 4 paper presentations lined up for the day, which will cover themes of private and non-state schools, virtual learning, gender, and methods. We are delighted to represent such a vast diversity of research topics and regions across these 2 days. I encourage you all to stay on till the end of the day. After our final paper presentation in the evening, we are going to hear closing thoughts from our convener, Karen Valentine, and a vote of thanks from Professor Nayanika Mathur, University of Oxford. This will be followed by an exciting event which looks at education in South Asia from the point of view of young spoken word artists in South Asia. They will talk about and even question issues ranging from writing a statement of purpose to the happiness curriculum mandated in schools by the Delhi government. So without wasting any more of your time, I'm going to move on to starting our program for the day. I hope you'll all attend as many sessions as possible through the day. We're going to be in room A and room B. And I hope that you'll attempt to also watch some of our videos, some of our recorded presentations that are uploaded as videos on our YouTube channel, which is also where we are live streaming this conference throughout the day. Thank you once again for being here. And I hope this is only going to be a start of our association together. Keep following our initiative on social media at OxEd South Asia for updates on more events like this, hopefully in the future. So we're now ready to begin our first roundtable for the day. While the speakers are here and getting ready for their session, I'm going to do a quick poll with the audience here. You'll see some very short questions popping up on your screen. So please do spend a few seconds answering them. It won't take you any time, but it will give us a better idea of the group that's attending this conference today. So I'm just going to launch this poll for you. I hope you can see some questions on your screen. We hope that you'll be able to quickly give us your answers in the next minute or so, and then we'll close this poll and move on to the roundtable. Okay, we can see some answers coming in now. Thank you so much. I hope that as many of you will be able to answer this in the next few seconds, and then we'll move on. Okay, we're almost there. Just a few more seconds to go. Thank you so much to all of you who filled this up for us. I'll just leave this on for another minute or so. Well, not a minute, but a few seconds. And we'll begin. I can still see some answers coming in. Okay, I can end the poll now. I'll also share the results with all of you so you can see the sort of group that's attending the conference today. I hope you can all see the results that have been shared on your screen. Great, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for this. It's really great to see these results. We're now ready to begin with our first roundtable for the day, which brings together education practitioners from across South Asia and discusses lessons learned and best practices in education during the pandemic. This session will be chaired by Amina Singh from Kathmandu University, Nepal. Professor Singh, I now hand over to you to begin the roundtable. We're really looking forward to the conversations today. And for the audience, this conversation will last for about an hour. And then after that, we'll also have 30 minutes for audience questions and answers. So please feel free to put in your questions into the Q&A section. You'll see a Q&A box near on your Zoom screen. So please do send in your questions. We'll hope to get to as many of them at the end as possible. So thank you so much. And Professor Singh, I'm handing over to you now. I hope all the speakers will switch on their videos when they present. We're really looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mohini. Namaste, everyone. I'm Amina from Nepal. While we're talking about practice, I hope the internet connection here bears with me, because I've been getting notices that the internet is weak, so I hope it lasts. I usually don't have this problem. So the topic of this particular conversation, roundtable conversation, is rethinking education practice, and it's an honor for me to chair this roundtable conversation with this thing. Today we confirmed. I conveners about one of our panelists. We have Shobhini Mukherji, the executive director. We have Jayanti for Nepal. We have Pramath Sinha. He's the founder and chairman of Harappa Education, founder and trustee of Ashoka University. And we have Sonam Norbu, founding coordinator, Volunteer Teachers Organization, Bhutan, VTOB Foundation. And last but not the least, we have Harsha Aturupane, lead economist, World Bank, Sri Lanka. I have not seen Mr. Harsh in the panelists yet, so I hope I get some notification on that. So as Mohini is already, and from yesterday's practice, we're kind of aware of how the format of this roundtable conversation goes. We have 1 hour. to talk. So we'll be talking about rethinking education practice in light of some of the experiences and challenges that we have faced in education in South Asian context during this COVID-19 pandemic. So this experience has also provided us with opportunities to come up with some innovative and creative practices. So that's what we are hoping to hear from our speakers today. Our conversation today will be guided by two broad questions, and the questions that have been formulated for this particular conversation are such. What have been some of the lessons learned and best practices in education during the pandemic? And based on these insights gained during this period, what are your thoughts on the future of education in South Asia? And as Mohini has already said, we'll have each speaker will have about 7 to 10 minutes to put their ideas forth, and then we will go into the question round. So hopefully we'll finish within the 1 hour of sharing. So without further ado, I'd like to start off. I'll hand it over to Shobhini to share your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you, Amina. This is very exciting to be part of this discussion. And I feel that, and thank you for inviting me to this particular roundtable, because it really is the need of the hour when we think about, education practice and the current context. But I'll take a step back here. When we think of the reset in education post-pandemic, I believe it is important to understand the main features of the crisis in order to know what to reset. So the crisis existed even before the pandemic, and the last 16 months of school closures have only just worsened what we are calling the education crisis. So I'll just take a few moments to briefly explain what I think are the main features of the crisis. So first and foremost, every evaluation done in the last several years points to a very low baseline in India. So learning levels have remained persistently low, as has been seen in the National Assessment Surveys, the Annual Status of Education Report, which is a nationwide survey that happens in India every year. And anyone who's familiar with education data will know what I'm saying as well. And second, the data also points to gaps at each grade or level, with variations across states in India. We see flat trajectories year on year in learning profiles of children. For instance, today, nearly 50% of class 5 students in rural India are unable to read even class 2 level text. This is from the previous ASER survey of last year. And third, when you try and overlay a one-size-fits-all curriculum on top of this, you have a learning disaster on your hands. Kids who are already behind their grade level competencies fall further behind as teachers are focused on teaching and completing the syllabus. So we are all aware of this problem. And now if you put a pandemic amidst this already deepening crisis, and schools are closed for 16 months, 2 years later, you will have an entire generation of children emerging on the other side of the pandemic who have neither ever been to school or are straight away thrown into grade 2. Or even worse, children who are already in school have forgotten their foundations. And there's a bit of evidence coming across during this time from India. A recent study by the Azim Premji University in India estimated that about 92% children in classes 2 to 6 have lost their language skills and 82% have lost their math skills. Now, this is quite shocking. And previous research that has studied the effects of school closures on learning outcomes in other contexts, for instance, if you take public health emergencies such as influenza or Ebola or other interruptions such as earthquake, teacher strikes, summer breaks, there've been enough evidence to show that these result in learning losses, and it's been well documented in South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Western Europe, etc. One of the recent evidence that I'll just quickly cite, which is very pertinent to the current context, is from the 2005 earthquake in Pakistan on the effect of a disaster-induced disruptions to learning. It finds that school closures lasting 4 months resulted in students losing as many as 1.5 years of schooling, or 2 entire grade levels, how you look at it, over time. And much of this was then exacerbated after students returned to school and attempted to keep up with the rather ambitious curriculum, which were not tailored to their changing needs. And the World Bank, in fact, projects that students in South Asia will have lost estimated, 0.5 learning adjusted years of schooling, which is a standardized measure for educational attainment, and which is an enormous setback in this. So I think the biggest mistake that we can make is to go back to the status quo once schools reopen in education practice and begin teaching children at grade level like before, instead of spending the first few months focusing on building their foundations. We need to tackle the root cause of this crisis as we think about the reset in education practice today. And the elephant in the room is going to be the curriculum that was never at pace with the learning abilities of children and will be even more alien to them now. So when we think about solutions, we have solutions from even before the pandemic. There are very interesting things that have taken place in the last 1 year. We just need to plan creatively and use the lessons during the pandemic to implement them effectively. So, for instance, I'll cite some very very relevant evidence from before the pandemic, and there is enough research to show. It's been, JPAL has done several evaluations on this to show that any effort to meet children at their level leads to significant improvements. Teaching at the level of the child. The DFID, World Bank's Great Buys in Education, who synthesize these interventions that are most cost effective in improving learning in basic education, measured in terms of cognitive skills, typically literacy and numeracy, in low and middle income countries. So they point to sort of intervention that target teaching instruction by the learning level and not grade, both in and out of school for children. And this body of research I'm referring to is called Teaching at the Right Level, which has now been evaluated through rigorous randomized controlled trials over the past decade. And we've seen this especially for 7 to 8-year-olds who are cognitively ready for this level of engagement. And India's latest national education policy also puts focus on basic literacy and numeracy. I will say that fortunately, we know enough about COVID-19 to be able to open schools safely. Organizations like UNESCO, UNICEF, World Bank, etc., have put out very detailed recommendations to guide reopening of schools while minimizing infection risk. But I will now say here that while the instinct of many officials, and we are seeing that in India, is to open schools for classes 9 to 12 because of their board exams, the bigger priority should actually be to open schools for grades 1 through 5 to ensure universal mastery of foundation skills as prioritized by NEP. Backing this actually is a very large body of evidence that highlights the importance of early years in the formation of human capital of any country. And therefore, our school opening priorities should reflect this. So I will just, say a few other learnings. So I've talked a lot about, grade level instruction. So there are other learnings and insights that we've learned during the last year through efforts made by governments and NGOs to engage with children during the pandemic, sort of in terms of engaging parents, engaging communities, rethinking teacher engagement, and teaching practices into the future, sort of having a very decentralized and localized approach to the reset in education practices. This is what we need now. So while several state governments over the last year focused on the supply side, so to provide the right tools in the hands of students, to provide access to infrastructure and content for learning. So these included free tablets, laptop, mobile phones, but were mostly for students in higher grades. Schools purchase Zoom licenses for online lessons. And I will argue that while this is necessary, it's not sufficient because we have findings now from several experiments that suggest that initiatives which expand access to computers and internet alone do not improve learning outcomes, but they do increase computer usage, improve computer proficiency, and so on. These studies were before the pandemic, but I think there is merit in expanding access to technology to ensure continuity in learning. But along with that, while states continue with the effort to bridge the digital divide by improving access to technology, it is important to be. These are means of passive learning. So you need to help students actually understand concepts. For this, states need to provide students dedicated support, personalized instructions, even if it is in remote form, to make sense of what they are reading, reviewing, listening to. So while efforts are to improve learning and provide individualized efforts, I can see this happening in India at higher levels. It is important to invest the same effort with younger students in primary grades so that they do not lose the critical skills by the time schools reopen, and continue to focus on this when schools reopen. There's evidence that learning outcomes and that can be improved through parental engagement and through low-cost technology such as text messages. So what we've seen in the last year, WhatsApp being an application using lesser bandwidth is reported to be the most popular method to deliver learning materials to children remotely. This is of course critical in the COVID context of school closures. And of course, where there is greater disparity in access to technology through the internet and mobile phones. So we have some evidence, very interesting evidence coming from, say, Botswana in the last year, where researchers have evaluated a phone-based remote learning program aimed at keeping kids engaged. And I'm not saying learning, but keeping kids engaged in grades 3 to 5 with some sort of learning during the pandemic. And this is essentially, basic numeracy and literacy. So there were weekly SMSs that were sent to households with containing several, simple math problems. And then you had another intervention group which received these SMSs, but with a phone call from the teacher. And the teacher or the facilitator spoke to the students and the parents as a way to encourage and maintain this sort of accountability and maintain touch. And what we found was, and of course, there's a comparison group that did not receive any type of this phone learning support. So what we found was that after the first 4 weeks, relative to the comparison group, numeracy increased by 13% amongst the SMS-only group and sort of 24% among the SMS plus phone calls group. So there was more engagement, and parents were more likely to spend time engaging with their children on education activities with higher engagement in that SMS plus phone call group. So I think we can discuss more of this over the course of today. But the main point that I want to make is that these elements somehow must be included in the education systems into future practice, recognizing the important role that they've played to step in and fill the gap right now, and sort of thus becoming one of the main support systems for children during this time. We're going to see a stop-start approach in our functioning, and our practices have to evolve to be flexible, be localized in our planning. Most importantly, we should not be in a hurry to jump into the curriculum. Instead, we need to focus on building foundation skills, which don't necessarily need to wait till you're in the post-pandemic. So I conclude by saying that expanding access to technology and leveraging low-cost technological interventions to reach parents and students should be prioritized when schools are closed. But when they reopen, it is imperative that public and private school children are given space and time to be able to catch up on the learning losses that they have sustained. And countries will need to think about how to recover better so that they don't simply replicate the failings of sort of the pre-COVID status quo. Thank you.
Thank you, Shobhini. I think that kind of resonated a lot with what I've also seen happening in Nepal as well. Thank you so much for that. So I want to move on to our next speaker. We have Jayanti Lama, Head of Training, Teach for Nepal. Jayanti, the floor is yours now.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for having me here. I feel honored to be sharing this space with all of the influencing people in this room. Before I begin my sort of presentation here, I would like to talk about what Teach for Nepal is and what Teach for Nepal does. So Teach for Nepal is an organization leading a movement of university graduates and young professionals to end education inequity in Nepal, with vision of one day all children in Nepal will attend an excellent education. So we start with 2 years of fellowship teaching math, science, and English in rural public schools. So when pandemic happened, we had a huge question of what's next, because as I said, we work in rural public context. Having an idea of like getting to all these children and reaching out to them with online classes was almost impossible thing to do. So we had a lot of questions around how to help our students continue their learning. And I think here, not just like to continue their learning, but also to engage them in first place. Also, we sort of like thought of different mediums to actually reach out to them. What could have been effective or feasible mediums to reach to them. And also to make sure that whether or not the resources that we provide them would be used by them or not, because we had no much clue of like whether they have accessibility to any sort of technology. Also, the activities that we were conducting initially, we also thought of like whether these activities would, ensure some outcomes or not. So beginning with, as an organization, we conducted survey around, all 7 districts that we work, and we surveyed almost 1,556 students in 7 districts and had a data of in an average, 90% of our students had access to a phone. And similarly, they like 50% of average student had access to local FM in their network. But again, this put us into a big conflicting questions like any other educators all across. For example, I mean, we work in a context where our children have to walk for 4 hours to get to schools. And here we were in this dilemma of whether to reach to those 10 children of our school, of our class out of 35. Like we were absolutely leaving out 25 kids behind. So we had a lot of questions around that, and we thought of like as an organizations also we had cluster level projects and fellows initiating their own ideas in the classrooms that they could take. So we sort of came up with an idea of design thinking program where we could bring all our fellows to actually think through and come up with some brilliant ideas that could be, something that we could try out in our placement schools. But before even doing that, our fellows came up with an, engaging sort of programs where they sort of started teaching their content in terms of knowledge and skill-based activities through different social network platforms like Zoom, Messenger, Emo, Viber, WhatsApp, whatever was available for them. Not just that, they also thought of the possibility of, or even for that matter, the need of psychosocial counseling. So they reached out to their students for this, and they were like in constant call and text messages with their children and helping them to manage their emotions or just to listen to their emotions at the point. They also had different project works which sort of highlighted their art, literature, and they also hunted some talent all across the districts that they were working. But since we already had, data collected that in context to Nepal, I think radio and phone would be a effective medium to reach out to our children. We initiated different projects like radio program, Masik Desu, where our fellows actually did on-air shows where they sort of talked about the different contexts that they were delivering, of course, math, science, and English with social and emotional content in collaboration with other organizations working. Not just that, our fellows also worked around different cluster projects like Pen Drive project, where they recorded video and audio to actually deliver it to their respective schools in collaboration with their head teachers, in collaboration with the local government and existing teacher, which was somehow helpful for us to get to some of the students. I wouldn't say all 100% student, but some of the students. Also, we had e-magazines and concept of workbook in a cluster level, which we thought would be a right idea to make it in organizational level with an idea of learning for all, with a project called Don't Stop Learning, where we came up with an idea of blended learning. This was thought from two different perspectives, remote learning and in-person learning. So when we said blended learning, we knew that our fellows were already in action. I mean, they were reaching out to their students through phone calls, messages, online classes, and different social networks. So we brought an idea of workbook, which was something that we could provide our students with on their hand. And in case of like the school would be expanded, closed more, they could still use this resources to continue their learning, or at least to engage their students. While if the school would open, they could still use this workbook, which was again foundational and grade-wise label. So foundational was something that would help children to learn at their right level, whereas the grade would ensure their learning loss that was caused by pandemic to actually to bridge that gap with the textbook that they were teaching, with approach of home visits and learning centers. But having said this all, I think one thing I would really want to advocate here at the end of my speech or presentation, whatever we call it. One thing, I mean, there are few learnings that we've learned as an organization, but I think to be the most, I think the student data is something that we want to absolutely advocate. And when we think of students' data, it's not just the background or where the students are joining from, but also the accessibility to technology. I think it's if we had earlier data on that, I think we could have started our work earlier, way earlier. Apart from that, student leadership has to be an approach in public school, especially in context of Nepal, where there's no excess of transportation when the pandemic happened, and then I think the teachers were not able to go back to their schools. So in such cases, I think students would be, students' leadership would have ensured to get all these students together and problem solve their problem in their communities and find some feasible approaches to continue their learning or at least engage themselves. Again, we also had some examples of our alumni students students who went back to their communities and helped their younger, brother and sisters learn and continue their learning. Whereas another is parents-teacher collaboration. I think even earlier presenter has already said about this, because if it wasn't parents, I don't think we would have been able to connect with our students for any reason. So another would be digital literacy and continuation of ICT integrated teaching and learning. It might be just like after the pandemic is done, we might just get to our normal schooling days and might forget what we've learned in these 2 years. But I think this is something that we have to continue as an educator to actually integrate ICT in our teaching learning. And the last one, but not being the list, and something that has worked for us is creating sustainable learning resources. For us, it was workbook, and it is workbook. So I think, for the country like ours, where we cannot reach in person when this sort of situation happens, I think workbook is something that would ensure our children to engage themselves in this learning. So with this, I would just want to conclude, but if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jayanti. There's been a little bit of disturbance on my end. I'm wondering if it's my internet or internet on that end. It looks like it's my internet. Thank you so much. But I think, as the earlier speaker Shobhini kind of highlighted, the challenge is it's about the engagement. There's an access issue and then the engagement, and you kind of shared some of these practices that you have used, your organization and the fellows of Teach for Nepal have used in kind of doing that. Yeah, and the question answer round probably we'll hear more from you as well. Next, I'd like to pass on to Pramath Sinha, founder and chair of Harappa Education and founder and trustee of Ashoka University.
Thank you, Amina, and thank you for having me on this panel. I hope you can hear me okay. I think a lot of what Shobhini talked about has obviously impacted students in higher education as well. And I'd like to stick to higher education because that's where most of my work is. And we've heard from Shobhini and Jayanti on the school part of education. And if I was to tell you about some of the issues that we have faced, I think they would mirror a lot of what Shobhini had to say. So maybe I will also skip over and talk about what are some of the interesting learnings about new opportunities that I see. And I don't want for people to take away that I'm painting a rosy picture, because I think all of the problems that we've talked about are also true for higher education, and I want to acknowledge that. I think this has been a really disruptive year, and just this morning we were having a conversation at the senior management levels at Ashoka to say, when are we going to start, if at all? We have a very popular one-year program at Ashoka. In fact, Mohini Gupta is an alumnus of that program called the Young India Fellowship. And since it's just a one-year program, that entire year went by without the students ever actually having a live face-to-face class. They did get a few months on campus in the middle when we thought we could bring them back. But even then, not all of them could come. So they've gone through a whole year without ever meeting some of their classmates. And so particularly for one-year programs, when people are actually really looking forward, they put their life on hold. This is for a lot of people, this will be the last educational formal experience they'll have. It's really disappointing that they haven't been able to. But of course, these students are really privileged. I mean, they still got a pretty good experience online. But then if you look at what's happened to the rest of the world, where perhaps the kind of resources that we had at Ashoka were not available, I think some of the issues that Shobhini raised affects higher education as well. But let me quickly give you 2 or 3 examples of something very interesting that at least I personally got involved in and discovered during this period. I'm a big believer in the online mode of education. And it's not because I'm a big fan of it. I mean, of course, I've made a made a career out of building brick and mortar face-to-face institutions. But as I've done that, I've realized that there is no way that in a country like India, that model will be able to provide education to the large numbers that we have. It's not going to happen. It just doesn't add up. We are living in a pipe dream if we think we can build enough classrooms and get enough teachers to educate all of the people who expect to get educated or to learn in higher education. I think that's probably true for school education as well, but I won't go there. But particularly in higher education, where actually the numbers are relatively small, we claim a GER in India of about 25%, which means 1 in every Indian of that age group really gets to go to college. The government is talking about taking that number up to 50% in the next 15 years. And that's staggering. That's almost a doubling of where we are today. We just can't build as many classrooms or find as many teachers to do that. So we in India have no option. We have no option but to provide high quality online learning, because for many, many young people in this country, and perhaps sadly so, that's the only way they will learn. They will not have access to a classroom. So for a long time now, I have gotten away from debates about whether online is better or not, and whether it hurts or not. So the pandemic provided an interesting opportunity to experiment without getting into those debates. And that's what I want to quickly talk about. So at Ashoka, we launched something called Ashoka X. What we did there was we said, okay, let's look at faculty from around the world. And even if they're not Ashoka faculty, what if we convince them to offer a course live online, taught online, to students, and students who are not necessarily Ashoka students? They could be any student from anywhere. Now, essentially what you're doing is that if you look at it from a figurative standpoint, you're basically opening up the walls of the university, both in terms of faculty and students. So suddenly we had these 13 courses that we were offering. Very few were actually offered by Ashoka faculty. So to give you an example, a course was offered by Nicholas Dirks, the Chancellor of Berkeley, former Chancellor of Berkeley. There was a course offered by my friend who's a journalist who was on a fellowship at Princeton. These people would never teach in India, and they are great teachers. So they offered a course, and people across all ages and all disciplines took these courses. So we had people who were in grade 9, and we had 70-year-olds taking these classes. And we saw live what the medium can do in terms of really breaking down the traditional sort of brick and mortar boundaries to education. So that was an amazing experiment, and that has led for us to be able to convince the Ashoka faculty and the Ashoka administration to actually launch Ashoka X in a much bigger way. And it now continues to grow in terms of its offerings. So that's one interesting example of how you take an existing institution and significantly improve its footprint, and not be the elitist institution that you were, that thousands of people apply and we take pride in the fact that we take only a few hundred every year. Hey, all of those thousands can benefit from an Ashoka education and the quality of an Ashoka education. So that was one big thing. In another arena, I took this idea further, and along with the government, we've created the beginnings of what I think could be the world's largest online only university, right? This is the evolution of the next version of what exists in India today, which is an open university, which is still brick and mortar, live. But what if you had to build an open university that was online? But the difference being that the existing open universities are always considered poor quality. How do you make an online university that will offer the same quality as the best quality institutions and to every student? So you're not tiering and saying, hey, I'm tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. If there's a course on history, there's a course on history that is offered by some of the best faculty and it's available to everyone. So not only are you democratizing education, you're actually democratizing quality education. And that's the point. And so what we did was we curated courses from around the world that were available for free and started to make them available to students and map it to their curriculum. I don't want to get into the gory details of it, but the idea is that if you had to do a microeconomics course, right? Instead of going around searching across platforms and going to edX and Coursera and doing searches and so on, we'll make a microeconomics course that's really high quality and offer it to everyone who wants the microeconomics course and make it really affordable. And it's possible to do that. To give you an example, a lot of the online content that is available is very Western. So for example, on Indian history, there's only one online course offered by a professor at the University of Melbourne. And it's not even really a history course. He talks about economic history and political history and so on. There is nothing on the history of the subcontinent available online, which is staggering. And I discovered that during this pandemic. So creating courses that actually cater to the region and to students in the region. And we built this platform called Sama Shiksha, where the idea was that you offer Sarvashresht Shiksha, the best education, to the whole world, to the Sarv and to everyone. And I think that's really the motivation behind that. And I'm very excited about that. The last thing I will say is that the pandemic also showed me, and I'd already started this initiative called Harappa, where we were teaching cognitive, social, and behavior skills online. And a lot of people told me that, hey, how do you teach somebody how to communicate online? Or how do you teach teamwork skills online? Or how do you teach somebody about empathy online? But the pandemic forced us because there was huge demand, and it allowed us to innovate and come up. And frankly, the results have been staggering. I myself am surprised at how much people are learning about so-called soft stuff, even if it's remote. And the difference is really that they are learning it from high quality instructors, because even if they were learning it in class, the quality of instruction was not that great. So frankly, if you overcompensate with quality, then all of the degradation that happens in terms of remoteness, you compensate for. And the amazing thing is that using principles from behavior science and cognitive psychology, we've taken engagement levels up to in excess of 70%, which is not what MOOCs are known for. And I'm not saying this to boast, but to really say that, listen, there is a real opportunity here to provide engaging, high quality education online that is affordable and accessible to everyone. I'll stop here. I do want to again stop and say that, I don't want to present an over-optimistic picture. This has been a terrible year, and we've obviously had to all adapt, and there'll be long-term damage that we have to overcome. We have to be very careful about how we come back into the year. But I think there are some of the opportunities as well that have come my way, which I'm very excited about. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's a lot for me personally to unpack there as someone who's been forced to switch from face-to-face teaching to online learning the last 15 months or so. Emphasis on the shift on focusing on the quality of instruction and the engagement of it, and also the fact that how do we then contextualize it as well to make it more engaging. So that's in the context of higher education. Organization was not heard there. Table connection. Sonam, over to you.
Oh, okay. I was waiting, like I lost you in between. Greetings from Bhutan, Kuzuzangpo. So Kuzuzangpo is a general greeting that we use in Bhutan. So it's Kuzuzangpo. So I'm very happy to share the platform and the stage with a lot of thinkers and influencers. So thank you, Mohini, and thank you, Oxford, for this platform. So without much ado, I would like to, without much waste of time, I would like to say that the world has come together with the pandemic, and I think we should come together and stand together as one. So with this prayer, I would like to say that let us all support and stand in solidarity to keep ourselves safe and let education continue. So with this, I would like to present in two forms. The first form would be how Bhutan responded to the pandemic in terms of education. And we call it in terms of giving continued education during the pandemic. And the other one is how, as an educator, I feel that the next education should be, or rethinking education should be. So before I start, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Sonam Norbu, former teacher. I've been a teacher with the Ministry of Education until February 2021. And right now I'm heading a small but a very big dream organization called VTOB Foundation, which looks at enhancing educational engagement in the society. So welcoming to Bhutan, I would like to say that with the blessings and the guidance of our His Majesty the King, we have been doing a lot for a small country. And to present some figures, we are a country of about 170,000 students and about 10,000 teachers. So what happened when the pandemic struck was we were able to respond to the pandemic in the quickest way. We started off with teleeducation, where teachers came together and made video lessons and used the television to teach the students. So we were able to cater to almost 90% of the students through that. And what happened when as we were taking forward the teleeducation, we have found that more than 17,000 people or 17,000 children did not have access to television. So the next step that we took was the Ministry of Education of Bhutan took was that we were going ahead with the radio lessons and the self-instructional materials. So to give more detail to that, the self-instructional materials are materials like small textbooks which has instructions on lessons. So the child who has a self-instructional material will be able to learn on his own, because it's like a workbook. And it is the replication of the BBS, the television lessons that teachers delivered to the students. And more than the radio lessons, the self-instructional materials and the television lessons, teachers and the schools came together with the support from the Ministry of Education to take forward online teaching learning. So Google Classroom all of a sudden became a top name in the vicinity of the teachers and the students. So we used Google Classroom on a very as much as we could do. And we also were using social media platforms like WeChat and Messenger and whatever, WhatsApp, and any social media platform which could connect the teachers to the students. So for a fairly small country like Bhutan, I would say that we were able to really take the pandemic as an opportunity to transform that challenge into endless opportunities. So Bhutan really tried to respond to the pandemic. And also, as the pandemic was going forward and as the phases of the pandemic changed, we were waiting for the reopening also. So we opened schools in phase-wise, and everyone came together for the continued education of 170,000 children in Bhutan. So that's how we were responding to the pandemic as a country. And I would say that for a small country and with our visionary His Majesty the King in the forefront, fighting the pandemic day in and day out, we are more than motivated to support as teachers and as citizens of the nation of a small country of more than just 700,000 people to come together. So when the schools began to shut down worldwide due to the pandemic, Bhutan was not left aside, but Bhutan was trying to come back as a small nation, because our His Majesty always said that we always had the advantage in numbers because we had very less numbers. So it is in our advantage that we can respond to the pandemic in the best way possible. However, I would say that this did not come easily because the digital divide and a scare and uncertainty of the future, and suddenly schools going homeschool and schools going online was quite a new thing for Bhutan, a small country where TV just was introduced in 2000, and where internet became uh, a day-to-day affair very lately. However, I would say that we were quite responsive to the pandemic, and we were able to respond in our best possible ways. Now, after more than a year into the pandemic, and as an educator myself, and as a very passionate a person who likes to look at education in a very different way, I thought the pandemic has, I would like to thank the pandemic actually, because it has actually revealed the vulnerabilities of the school system, which has been there for a long time. And I thought it has opened up the opportunity for everyone to look at education and try to see how education can go beyond the grades, how education can go beyond giving the certificates, and how education can change from the factory model to having learning contents as well as experiences, and as well as process which will suit the need of the future. Because according to the World Economic Forum, it is estimated that 65% of the current primary school children will not know what kind of job that they will be in. So I think we cannot continue with the same content, we cannot continue with the same elephant in the room, the same curriculum, or the same process, because we might have to move towards future fitting education. So the opportunity that I would see in education or in rethinking education, because of the education in crisis, I think it is okay to be opportunistic, and it is okay to be positive, to say that the time has come for now to really reform, rethink, and look at education as a different way of preparing children or preparing people for the future. So future fitting education is what I feel that the pandemic has really taught every one of us. We were too really relaxed, I would say, or we were okay with what was happening. Suddenly the pandemic came and we were taken, even first world countries were taken by surprise. So I think it is the time, or the pandemic has really teased us to say that reimagining education should happen now. I would repeat the word should happen now. And now I would like to agree with the other panelists saying that online education is the next big thing, and the time for automatic, digitized, and fluid education system where schools can happen anywhere from any place. And the idea or the belief that education is synonymous to school should change, I think, because education can happen from anywhere and from any mode or from any channel. So education cannot be synonymous to schools, because when certain things like the pandemic hits and the schools are closed, we cannot just let education stop. So that's something that I really feel that as educationists and as people who are close to heart with education, I think we should prepare to the education 4.0 with the view that education cannot be synonymous to schools, and education should move forward to respond to the challenges of the future and the present, as well as trying to future fit education. And moreover, it has also given us the opportunity during the crisis to make long overdue changes to the education system. Our education systems really needed change. So the pandemic has I think it has fast forwarded the need for change. So I think everybody should come together and accept that education needs to change. And lastly, before I wind up, I would like to say that more than the degrees and more than the certificates that education has been producing, I think education should now nurture productive citizens. Education should respond to the work environment, the economic need, and what education should do is to produce productive and active citizens who can respond to the need of the world and try to contribute to a circular economy, and also be an asset to his community. So education should go beyond certificates and grades and schools. Education should really start producing skill-based and people who are ready to respond to challenges, people who are going to come out of school with talents and with skills so that they are ready for a whole new world. Not that they are carrying like different certificates and different levels of certificates. Rather than that, I would say that education should future fit a person who is interested in self-learning, who thinks that learning is lifelong, and who thinks that education is going beyond the classrooms and actually preparing himself to be a productive, active citizens. So with this, I would like to thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity. So I would like to stop here. Thank you, and Kadinche.
Thank you, Sonam, especially for that provocation about rethinking education itself, what constitutes education and how we actually imagine education and the function of education. Thank you so much for that. Our fifth speaker, unfortunately, Harsha Aturupane, he is unavailable to be with us today. So we have extra time. I'm actually going to kind of piggyback on one of the questions that have been asked here, but I'm going to ask it to all the four panelists. It's by MD Bayezid Khan. I'm not sure if I pronounced the name properly, but he's kind of raised the issue about inclusive learning. But from that, what I would like to ask is, in our part of the world, one of the issues that we've had, and Shobhini kind of highlighted that even prior to the pandemic, we already had some systemic issues. And one of the issues, the systemic issues that we have is this issue of equity and inclusion in the education system. So I'd like to hear any of your thoughts in terms of any ideas or thoughts around the practices of education during these pandemic that had kind of addressed that particular concern as well. Anyone?
Well, maybe I can quickly say that at least
Sure.
in the case of higher ed, Amina, I think our numbers were small enough for us to very systematically assess what were some of the challenges that students were facing. And when we knew that we were there for the long haul, to then systematically address those challenges. So one of the things we found was that, of course, a lot of our incoming students, because we did start a whole new class of students, didn't have laptops or devices that they may have bought at some point in their lives, but now they actually needed that to get. And so we had to make provision to actually get them those laptops and ship them during the crisis. A lot of students, despite their best efforts, were in areas where they couldn't get access to good bandwidth. So our teams worked pretty hard to figure out, how to get them, to the best providers in that area for data or a service that they could use. In many places, people helped ship these hotspots and dongles for people to use so that they could be. Then we had to make provisions for lectures to be recorded. And that created some problems because some faculty were very nervous about having the lectures recorded or the whole class recorded, and who was going to have access to that? Was it going to be stored? And created a whole host of issues. Anyway, but back to the point about providing access. So I think to us, that was one of the big things that came up. And then there were non-education but related issues, like some people didn't have a place to go. A lot of our foreign students were stuck on campus in India. And so even though there was diktats by the government to send everybody away, we had about 250, 300 people on campus. You had to protect them, so that's a different kind of access, but it was almost like access to a refuge during a crisis. What do you do? There were people who were, and there was another kind of crisis that we saw, that people were actually quite unhappy or in very extreme circumstances at their home. And when things eased up, needed to come back to campus. And that was a big decision. It is not, again, access related, but somewhat related to, doing the right thing by your students. So yeah, there were some obvious ones, but there were some also awkward and surprising ones, which we also had to cater to during this time.
Thank you for that.
So Amina,
Shobhini,
yeah, sorry if I may come in here. So I think in terms of, I will, and you mentioned that I've said this again, these issues of learning loss existed before the pandemic, and even inequities, access, all of these issues were there even before the pandemic. And if I give the example of, what I talked about, the 2005 earthquake in Pakistan and the Jishnudas and the co-authors, they found that, just 4 months of lockdown 4 months of school closures had led to learning loss of nearly 1.5 years or two grade levels. So one possibility we had, the authors said that it could be because the teachers continued with the regular grade instructions that I had mentioned before. But the other also interesting reason was the key insight that they had was that learning losses were highly unequal, even during school closures. And we're going to see that for the pandemic as well. And the way the learning losses were unequal is sort of, goes back to what was your environment at home. So children with educated mothers, for instance, were able to make up for school closures, but children with uneducated mothers were particularly even worse or badly affected. So, the trade-off, there's a whole trade-off that exists and that has continued to exist during the pandemic. And which is why I think I will, I'm going to be a little bit, I play the devil's advocate here. So while I completely agree with Mr. Sinha that, you do need, online learning is sort of, it is the way to go, given the fact that this is going to be a start-stop thing. We do, it's not, the virus is not going to go away after COVID-19. What next? 5 years from now, 10 years from now, right? So we need, it is a brave new world with a lot of viruses, and we need to be able to figure out how do we can't stop business, right? It's anyway. I sometimes wonder how bizarre things are, where schools, for instance, are the only ones to remain shut, but you've opened everything else. But I'll go back to the example I had talked about, where I'm almost thinking of, I agree with one of my, I think maybe I'm forgetting whether it was Mr. Sonam who had said this or someone else, but the fact that you need to have a blended approach, you need to have a hybrid approach, because if you go back to the example I'd given for the Botswana experiment, there were SMSs that were sent, so they didn't have internet, so they used SMSs to reach children in government schools in grades 3 to 5. So the SMSs, along with a phone call to be able to talk about what that assignment was and how to solve the assignment, I think that really kept the kids and parents more engaged. It improved learning levels for that cohort with that personalized one-on-one instruction. And when we think about giving access to technology, giving your mobile phones, tablets, etc., for higher education students, I think they'll be much better able to grapple that and be able to better use it, say, than kids in primary schools. Just cognitive abilities is one big challenge, I would say, in the lower grades here. And I think the other point I will make here is that we do want to move beyond for younger students, especially, we want to move beyond that passive means of passive learning, and this is where I think the inequity issue arises. So what you really do, and in fact, I would say that there's going to be a whole. I'm moving away from the equity question to say that there will be even more pressure in government schools going forward, and government schools teachers to deliver. We are seeing a lot of now private school enrollments are going down. It could be because kids are moving to government schools. It could be because of financial distress. It could be because these low-cost private schools have shut down. Teachers in government schools cannot go back to business as usual. They cannot go back to, they were anyway teaching top of the class. There's enough that we hear about biases in government school teachers, for instance, to in terms of how they interact with students. There is something to be done over there in terms of creating a more equitable environment for among students with their teachers as well, moving forward, because you will need to provide remedial instructions to every single child. You will have to personalize that instruction, and you will have to be able to sort of deliver as a teacher in this chaotic environment. So there's something else, I think, in terms of, we've not discussed this, but one of the resets has to be teacher education practice in terms of what instructions they are getting and how they're being able to deliver. And first and foremost, at least this government of India needs to leave them alone. They need to leave them alone to teach, rather than putting them in all of these, COVID duty and polls, elections and whatnot. So they need to be able to focus on their primary task. So sorry, I digressed a little bit.
Thank you, Shobhini. Jayanti or Sonam, did you have anything else to add to that? Yeah.
I think adding on that, I mean, this is a great question, and we always, I think, discuss a lot about equity. And it was something on our knobs when, pandemic happened, because all the fellows came to us and, like we started talking about what equity meant. Not that we did not discuss it earlier, but of course in pandemic, it was a big debatable issue with such a limited access to technology. And I think one of the things that I would like to just highlight would be around, equity. I mean, the idea of equity should accelerate teachers' action. It shouldn't limit. So meaning that, like we had different mediums that was available. It did not, make us limit to just like, okay, we're not getting to reach 35 students in our classroom. So let's not just, do anything. We just stay back until like everybody is, included. Instead of that, what we did was, we tried out all the mediums that was available. For instance, just like reaching out to 5 children via messenger, okay, like just texting, just send, asking them to send pictures of their assignments or work that they were doing. Apart from that, there were, other programs like radio program, which we made sure that, we connected children with who had access to these radio programs. And then we conducted, the teaching and learning that way. Again, there were also children who we could not reach. So for that, of course, like for those children, we also connected with different teachers in our network, like existing teachers, and we talked about what could be a solution. And we went and, like there were a group of teachers who were actually going for a home visit to survey whether children were interested in, studying or not. We got a lot of stories of our children, dropping out because of so many reasons, of course. So I think when I think of this agenda now, I just feel like it does not, I mean, it should not be, and it shouldn't be a reason to limit our action. It should just accelerate. And for whatever reasons or whatever mediums we can connect and we can, engage our children and help them continue their learning, that should be done. But that does not mean like we shouldn't, talk about this topic. It always existed and it will. So I think it's better that we continue to, discuss on this area.
Sonam, yeah.
Yep. Well, it will be a kind of reiteration. However, like I would like to say that it was a beautiful thing that we were doing in Bhutan. It was like the divide and everything, like the equity and the issue of these things were already like very much prevalent before the pandemic, but like the pandemic has just made it so obvious. However, like I would like to say that just like I mentioned in my earlier presentation, we were like having self-instructional materials so that children who did not have access to television could get that, or who did not have mobile devices to get that. And moreover, like just like Jayanti has just mentioned right now, teachers crossed rivers and even like crossed mountains in Bhutan to reach to their school, to their students on home visits and on home teaching. So teachers really took that extra step to really not leave anyone behind when it comes to education. So we really believe and we really practice the free education system and the education for all principle in Bhutan. So I think equity in terms of reaching out, be it online or be it offline education, we are trying our best. And I think during the pandemic, we have done more. So I think like it is a question as we go forward with more of these kind of things, and where technology is becoming a part of education in a more and more way as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonam. Shobhini, yeah, I see your hand raised.
So this is a very quick anecdote. I'm just going to summarize it. Just I was hearing both Mr. Sonam and Jayanti speak. There's an anecdote there's a phrase that I've heard one of our partners say very often. She's Dr. Rukmini Banerjee. She's the CEO of Pratham, one of the largest education NGOs in India, and they're very old partners of JPAD. So she says, Pratham was always doing teaching at the right level. That's what I was talking about, the evidence that we've evaluated over the last decade. But she said what they did during the pandemic was pivot to reaching at the right level. And in terms of how they reached so they worked across 10,000 communities, and how they reached every child in those communities was remarkable. And I'm hearing Jayanti say this as well, and it's exactly what sort of played out. I just thought I'll share that.
I see a question from Sango Bidani, and I'm going to kind of paraphrase the question. So at the heart of the practice that we're talking about, when we're talking about rethinking education practice, the main practitioner is the teacher. So I want to ask each of you what kinds of insights you have in terms of support or even teacher education that we could probably carry forward to shape the whole practice of teacher education in our context. Any thoughts and insights from that? And what kind of support was provided in this whole pandemic situation? Because I'll just read out what Sango Bidani has written. While I agree that we definitely need to engage with online education, my reservations stem from the abysmal teacher training that we received, especially in India. I certainly believe that until we address this aspect of teacher training, we might not necessarily be able to take advantage of the benefits of online education. Yeah. So I open it to any of the four panelists to give their thoughts on that, or anything on teacher education. Sonam, yeah, please.
Yes, I'm very much passionate about teacher enabling and having teachers really equipped for what we need to do. So I think this is a very sorry, my video was off. So I think this is a very pertinent question that everybody of us must respond to. I think more than the policymakers and more than anyone, it is the teachers who really need to be looked at, because they are the ground our soldiers, or they are the ones who really take education forward. So be it any form of education, I think the teachers need to be equipped with that, because what we learn in the teacher training colleges and what we are supposed to do in the school, if that does not match, the whole thing is not going to work, and anything is not going to work. So with the pandemic coming all of a sudden, and when teachers were not prepared, and as we were going into the digital age, I think it is very much more than emergency or more than urgent to really look into teacher education as the first start or the first step, so that teachers are enabled, teachers are equipped to this kind of education system, to assist an education system which can be blended learning, which really needs to be education in crisis, where teachers are ready to do online teaching and learning. Because I would like to share a short example, or maybe just point out a statement. A teacher is shy to come in front of a camera to teach his student or her student. However, he or she is not shy when he has to come to face-to-face teaching learning. So what kind of gap is there when we try to do these things? And with Zoom and with Google and everything, the online things coming up, are we preparing our teachers for that? I think before we talk about equity and before we talk about education for the children, I think it should be more of starting with how teachers will be the foot soldiers to take whatever sort of education that comes after the pandemic. Thank you.
So I think, Amina, I had said this before as well. Yeah, so I had said this before as well, that given the fact that we are going to see a lot of pressure on government schools going forward, it's the government school teacher that we are actually most worried about. There have been many studies that we've done as JPAL in the last decade on teacher effectiveness, teacher training. So we have some evidence. I mean, I can even talk about what we found effective, but I think one thing I'll say about the last 1 year is the fact that teachers went from in-person instruction to doing Zoom classes. But what did not change was what they were really doing with that curriculum. So they just simply moved to going back to teaching the way they were teaching. The rote, we say this all the time, rote learning, and they went back to that in Zoom classes. I myself am a mother of an 8-year-old, and I can see the teachers were struggling to figure out how do we teach the curriculum, and how do we do in their minds, how do you finish the curriculum at the end of the year? And that is a systemic problem in our country. We should not be bound by curriculum. And especially not now after the COVID year. So first and foremost is how do we train and equip teachers to not have to worry? How do we take away that pressure of that, that big sort of elephant in the room, or that thing hanging on top of their heads, is that you have to finish the curriculum at the end of the year. Where is the curriculum? Kids are not even at grade level. Why are we even discussing about the curriculum? Why are we discussing about kids repeating a grade? Teachers need to be able to change sort of their approach and mindset. They should be allowed to be able to teach so free of the curriculum, so from the tyranny of the curriculum. So that's one point I will make in terms of what needs to change for teachers. And the same thing needs to change for practice in classrooms. The second most important point and we've seen this now in terms of the evidence, is coaching programs. So there is emerging evidence, I would say, that coaching programs could be an effective method of teacher training. I think there's more research needed to understand this, because the bulk of the evidence that we have done from randomized controlled trials are of small scale programs, and mostly in middle to high income countries. Low income countries, you will find a lot of less evidence. And then especially, how do we go to scale with that? So there are evidence to show that combining on-site training workshops with personalized coaching has been found to be effective. If you record a teacher teaching and you are replaying that back to them, that also has an impact in terms of how they're able to see their own video in terms of how effective as a teacher they are, right? And you can say, record it on Zoom, for instance, and record and play it back to them. But I feel that there is a little bit more that needs to be done in thinking creatively for how do we can't go back to business as usual, not with the teacher training, not with instruction in classrooms, and definitely not with how we're teaching students in the classrooms themselves.
Well, I can quickly add, Amina, that I couldn't agree more with Sango's question. And we've actually at Harappa designed an online program called a Faculty Excellence Program, which in fact addresses this issue for higher education instructors who want to become more effective online. And to Shobhini's earlier point, when I talk about online education, I don't mean recorded async lectures. Of course, these are supplemented. Even our 70% plus engagement rates are made possible because of the use of multiple means to engage, rather than leave it to the student or the teacher in this case, or faculty member to learn. This is an endemic problem for 10-year-olds as well as 25-year-olds, that there's only so much you can do out of self-motivation. I can speak for myself. I'm a chronic procrastinator. I would never complete anything if I was not pushed to do it. And I think it's true for most people. So in fact, this doesn't work. But a couple of quick things about the teacher training program that we discovered, at least I discovered personally. I teach a few courses here and there, and I had to make that transition. And some of you also, Amina, you were talking about it. One of the things that I have found, and I've incorporated this in a lot of the work we've done at Harappa, is that online instruction actually becomes a one-on-one instruction rather than a one-to-many instruction. And that's a big change that people have to make, because when I'm teaching online, somebody is only seeing my face on the screen. I mean, they may be seeing the other, depending on what medium you're using. But in fact, you are alone in the room. And so you are really, it's like the old days of, one-on-one tuition that I grew up in, when you went in the evening to get some extra learning from the local English teacher who lived next door. You actually sat across her dining table and she taught you, and it was not like the classroom. And I think that's one big change that happened that people have to realize. I think the second big change that has happened is that, not everybody who performs in the classroom is a good performer on television. And it's a little bit like drama, theater, and movies. The guys who do well in theater don't do great in movies, and vice versa. And I'm not joking, but Outlier, which I think is a program in the US that makes some of the best online courses that I have encountered so far, they actually do screen tests on their teachers, believe it or not. So if you take a microeconomics course on Outlier, they have 4 amazing instructors, and you'll say, like, who are these guys? Do they even exist? And so I did ask them that, and they said we auditioned 40 faculty members from around the United States and then settled on these 4 for teaching our microeconomics course. Right? So I think we have to, just as we at an Ashoka pay a lot of obviously attention to who teaches in our classrooms. I often say that our classrooms are our temples, and they are sacred. You can't just allow anybody to walk up and damage our students, right? You have to get the right teachers. Similarly, teaching online is not for everyone. And you have to be very careful that you know that this is a completely different medium. The last thing I will say, I think we are seeing a revolution that is not unlike what happened when books first came around. When the printing press came, people used the printing press to print Bibles because they thought this was a good way to spread the religion. Somewhere along the way, people said, aha, we can actually print books that will teach people. I learned all my physics from a book by Resnick and Halliday. They were professors at Purdue. I was sitting in Patna. My physics teacher in school was not very helpful. So I learned from 2 books. And when the books first came, people said, well, how will ever somebody sitting in Patna learn from 2 professors at Purdue? In fact, what will be Pramath's motivation to learn physics? How will he ever complete the book? And sure, all these books behind my back, I haven't read all of them. They are just there. Sometimes you read the front of the book and you don't finish the book. Same thing is going to happen with online as well. But the thing that it does is that the reach improves and quality does go up, because suddenly if I'm not getting a good quality teacher, I can pick up Resnick and Halliday, learn physics, and become an engineer, which I am aspiring to do. That's what we have to understand, that this is a completely different shift in terms of imparting, creating, communicating, ingesting knowledge. And if we treat it as that kind of revolution, then to me, it is very much like when we went from oral, guru shishya teaching, which is what must have existed before books first came out.
Thank you. Jayanti, yeah.
I just saw questions around if we're not focusing on curriculum, what happens with the exam system? I think that's one of the problem that we face as an organization, because when we recruit these all young people to be a teacher, they all are excited to go in the classrooms and do wonders. But again, there's a system at place which actually holds us accountable for outcomes, and for our case, the outcome always is a result. So I really do not want to go there, but again. Something that I think we understood out of all the practices that we sort of tried out last year. One thing to be really important to us was well-being of teachers. I mean, we were so much talking about students at center. We were trying to reach out to them, engage them, but then we had this bunch of adults who were teacher but who weren't able to manage their own emotions, and of course, like including everybody in the organization. So it was hard time for all of us. So I think when we think of training, we cannot just think training as technical aspect. There also has to be some components of all these social emotional well-beings that these teachers are responsible to take in the classrooms. Apart from that, I think another would be planning purposefully, like when Rasa actually shared about his experience working in this training aspect. I think one of the important things that this pandemic has highlighted is how well you plan an activity in online class. I mean, it was always, an important factor, even in in-person classes, but I think it has highlighted importance of, like having a good, meaningful and, relevant activity when it comes to online. You cannot just go there and babble or, like share the content and ask them to rote learn and come back. So I think one is that. And for our experience, I think another was investing on stakeholders. Like for us, it was our teachers, it was our local government that we worked with, even parents and students. not just that, sometimes it was also, connecting with our fellows parents and families, because it was hard for them to allow their children to get back to the placements after the lockdown was again opened, because still the case scenario was really hard. So I think two approaches that has really had a lot of importance in our working approach was like planning purposefully, working on our own social emotional well-being, and investing on stakeholders. So yeah, just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask Shobhini as well if she had anything to say about this question. How do you overcome the exam system if not follow the curriculum? Because we are used to this standardized system. My daughter is in the 10th grade now, so they're kind of they're being prepared for the SE exam. So any thoughts on that?
Amina, this is exactly what I've been, I'm trying to sort of overcome in terms of the kind of work that the evidence that we've had and what we're trying to do. So I would say that the basis, I think the basis of what this question is actually, on what our education system is built on, that itself is flawed. I mentioned right at the beginning that when we I mentioned at the beginning that there are about half of India's children, for instance, as part of the annual series of education report, are not kids in grade 5 are not up to grade 2 level. So where does the question of the curriculum come in here when you're not even able to cope with basic learning at grade level? You're not even at grade level. How are you going to even complete the curriculum? Children who in any classroom we find that teachers teach to the top of the class, children fall behind when they're not at grade level, and they fall even further behind when they're not able to cope with whatever the teachers telling them is Greek and Latin in the classrooms, right? So the curriculum is aspirational, it is unreal, it is not designed to be able to have every child follow through. So I'm not saying that we throw the curriculum out of the window. I'm saying you need to first focus on the basics of reading, writing, arithmetic. You need to bring kids up to build their foundational skills, bring them up to grade level. Then you keep pace with the curriculum. You can't, but whereas the first never happens. Kids keep going from grade to grade because the teacher wants to finish the curriculum. All our mindsets are attuned towards the curriculum for that North Star, which is your 10th board exams, the 12th board exams, where you have to do well. But then you are leaving half a country behind in this. So which is why I would say that I keep coming back to this, but the approach, the methodology that I've talked about before, teaching at the right level, that's been developed by Pratham. It used to be called Read India, now it's called Teaching at the Right Level. What that really does is it just takes away from you, it reorganizes. It says, forget about which grade you're in. You bring students together between grade 3, 4, and 5 by ability levels. Can you read a paragraph? Can you read a story? Can you read a word? Or are you a beginner level? They put kids across different grades. They put them in groups based on their learning levels, ability levels, and then you're sort of build over the next 1 month or 45 days, 60 days, you're building their foundations in those basic things. It's 1 or 2 hours a school day. You don't have to reorganize for the whole school day. You can spend the rest of the 4 or 5 hours of school doing the curriculum, but you start building the basic foundational skills where it really matters most. So that's the way I would think about it.
Thank you so much. I've seen a hand raised for quite a bit of time. Tashi Dorji, I've seen your hand raised. Did you have a question to ask to the panel? Tashi? You had a question to ask because I've seen your hand raised for some. Okay, so yeah, please, if you have a question to ask, please submit to the Q&A. There was one question from Raj Kumar Dungana. Whether our education policies, particularly school education, allows education institutions taking education beyond curriculum course, grade levels and formal exams and start looking at levels. I think but is there anyone who wants to kind of address I think this is more of like a policy level question.
Oh, okay. I'll just try answering that question. So as for my experience, this is where it gets tricky. I really don't think, our education policy or system values anything beyond examination. Of course, there is, importance of all the processes that we do along, but at the end, of course, the parameter is result, at least for now. But again, I think as an institutions, I can tell what we're doing. So when we place our fellows come up with like similar sort of, takeaways from their communities. So every time that we place one, level of, one bunch of cohorts, they come with similar sort of, sharings, like their children are still struggling with writing capital and small ABCDs, okay? And they're not even able to add or subtract. But again, with that, pressure to continue curriculum and finish the course, they also do some extra classes. They take extra classes to actually build that foundation level as fellows and help, like simultaneously take content. Plus, they're also taking extra classes classes as remedial classes to pull off all the gap that has been missed out in their grade levels. But again, I think with this, I would also like to share an experience of our low-take project that we ran during our COVID. And it seemed like, teacher knew better, like teacher had better ideas to teach curriculum text, textbooks or curriculum related activities more than they were, able to teach this foundational level. What the process was like was they had to, the teacher in the project had to call their students and teach them through phone, telephone. But then we had to actually sit down and give them a training on how to conduct this foundational, content classes over the phone. And of course, the, difficulties was to do it over a phone. That was new for all the teachers. Even the idea of like how to deliver a foundational level apart from the content. They were pretty much, great teachers in their content and textbooks, but when it came to foundational, they struggled on like where to begin and how to, align with one sort of session to another. So that is actually a fun question. I hope I just tried, answering from my own experience.
I'm kind of keeping my eye on the time. I think we have about 6 minutes left. So I think I want to use the remaining time because we do have a lot of interesting questions, but I think some of these questions have been kind of addressed in, like I see Rohini Sen's question about emotional labor. Teaching entails a lot of emotional labor. And I think Jayanti spoke a little bit on that. But I think I just would like to hear the last thoughts, probably kind of a minute each. Would be like one critical piece of thought to kind of imagine the future of education in South Asia in light of everything that you've shared here today? I know you've probably said something around this effect, but I just want to kind of gather our thoughts here towards the end of this session.
Maybe I can go first, Amina. I think the one thought I want to leave everyone with is that we are going to soon have to drop the word online in front of education and learning. What we today call online just becomes part of education. And whether it's pure online or hybrid or blended, or you can call it whatever name you will. And I go back to my book analogy. I mean, books are part of education. It's not like this was something different kind of education if you got it from a book as opposed to going in a classroom. So you learned, and this is just becoming one more avenue for people to learn. And I think that's the positive story to what we have learned from this pandemic. And yes, there are issues of access and there's issues of internet and so on. But over time, just as books went everywhere and spread all over, this is also going to get there. That's the only way we'll be able to solve for access, but most importantly for quality.
Thank you so much. Education is education, so online is just the mode. Who would like to go next? Sonam?
Can I? Okay, thank you so much for the enriching hour-long session. I would like to go with my last thing, and that would be on the psychosocial part of education. I think we, apart from the curriculum, apart from whatever is in the education system, I think the well-being of the teachers, the well-being of the students, and the psychosocial part of the students, and mainly in building the resilience amongst the students and the teachers is something that education should really cater to, because the world is going towards a very I would say that a very sophisticated system of change, and some changes we don't really can predict also. It's just like an earthquake. So I think to respond to that, to have people with resilience, people who are able to respond to challenges, and people who are able to cope up with emotions, I think that should be catered by education. And with that, I think education should rethink in such a way that we have to look at the soft parts of the human. And lastly, as a teacher, I always feel that whether be it online education or whether be it distance education or any sort of education, the human touch of teachers should be there. And I think enabling teachers in the classrooms to be the change makers is one of the paramount importance that everybody should give in the education system that comes after the pandemic. Thank you, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Sonam.
Jayanti? Yeah, with those saying, I don't think I have anything to add, but if I have to conclude, I would say creating some sustainable and contextual resources. I mean, we cannot leave our children to just figure out things on their own. They cannot remain there without connectivity of their teacher or not an adult reaching out to them. So I think do whatever it takes to to be done, but yeah, I think they should still be engaged in whatever the crisis that we face even in days to come.
Thanks, Jayanti. Yeah.
So I would say famous last words. I think I echo what all the panelists have said here, but in particular, I think I particularly liked what Mr. Sinha said in terms of, leave the word online from education. Education is education. How do you rethink how you sort of reset that education? So we have to be open to sort of thinking through education from a more holistic lens, both online and offline, with personalized attention, focus on building foundations, foundational learning or foundational skills, equip teachers to be able to teach in this new world order, as Mr. Norbu calls it, and engage parents and take them along in the journey.
Thank you so much to all the speakers. The issue of education is such a complex thing, because it's such a multi-stakeholder and a multi-actor environment. So just, I think we've only barely kind of touched on certain aspects of it. I just realized when Shobhini was ending her remarks, we've barely even talked about parents in this whole practice thing. Thank you so much for your sharing, and it's been a very insightful and a useful session for me. And thank you once again to the organizers and conveners of this conference. I'll hand it over to you, Mohani.
Thank you so much, Amina, for being such a brilliant chair for this session. You really ran it so effortlessly and smoothly. Thank you so much. And thank you, Shobhini, Pramath, Jayanti, and Sonam, for all of your insights. You've all been doing such brilliant work in the field. I'm really, really grateful that we could bring all of you together and hear from you and learn from your experiences. And I think I also love Pramath's suggestion of dropping online before education. I think that's a really great sort of optimistic note to end the session on. So thank you so much. Really, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your suggestions with us. So that brings us to the end of the first roundtable for the day. We have a short break now. We'll be back in half an hour at 12 o'clock UK time with 2 paper presentation panels in room A, which is this one, and room B. The presentation theme in room A will be private and non-state schools, chaired by Todd Wallenius, and room B will be virtual learning, chaired by Cameron Warner. You should have received links to both rooms. Otherwise, we'll be live streaming both of these rooms on our YouTube channel. So please feel free to watch them and attend them and ask questions to all the presenters. During the break, you can also head over to our YouTube channel. We'll share links on our chat now, and watch our recorded presentations, which have been submitted for the conference. We have a series of innovation spotlight videos, which highlight the work of organizations in South Asia, and also a series of recorded presentations, in addition to the live paper presentations at the conference. So please feel free to watch those in the next half an hour, take a break and come back. We'll be back at 12 o'clock. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here.